All right. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see all of you here today. And Brian, thanks for being here. Good to see you. It's about two before the hour, 2 minutes before the hour, and so we'll go ahead and wait just a bit to get started so more people can hop on the call. But once again, my name is Christine Brown. I'm the Director of Member Engagement for the Reno Sparks Chamber, and it's my pleasure to continue to bring calls within this Path Forward series that allow our members to get exposure and to have some face time with people who are influencers in our community, who are making decisions in our community, and of course, in Brian Duggan's case, the people who are telling the stories of our community and serving our community with vital public information, especially at a time like this. So it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. And I also want to thank our partners who are continually supportive and underwriting all of our efforts to provide the services we do to our members, including this series. So I just want to thank Wells Fargo, BBSI, Bailey, and Office Depot for their continued support. And I don't know if any of those folks are on the call today, but if you are, please receive that special thank you from me to you. So, all right, since it's 11 o'clock right now, we'll go ahead and just get started. So, like I said, we have Brian Duggan with us today. He is the executive editor of the Reno Gazette Journal. He previously served as the RGJ's investigations editor and its city reporter when he joined them in 2011. And he's also a Nevada native and studied journalism at UNR and public administration at USC. So Brian, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And so, full disclosure, this topic is near and dear to my heart. I just joined the chamber a couple months ago and previously worked at News 4 Fox 11 as managing editor. Was in the news business for 6.5 years. So my heart goes out to you and all the journalists who are working so hard to bring our community the vital information it needs and deserves. So I really appreciate you being with us today and for kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit for our members on how the news industry works and the tireless work that you are doing as journalists.
Sure, yeah, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. And I kind of come here with a couple of hats on. Obviously, one is the editor of the RGJ, but also as a founding member of the Nevada News Alliance, and which is a group of local outlets, including us. This is Reno, the Nevada Independent, Reno Public Radio, the TCO Mobile over at the J School. These are all local publications that are looking to sort of tell our story more in Nevada, to basically say that local journalism is the source of a lot of our information in this country, and we're frankly in a crisis in terms of funding, in terms of our future. That's why you probably see me write a lot of columns about why it's important to subscribe to your local newspaper, or just donate to other nonprofit news organizations, or buy advertising in local media. That's sort of the lifeblood of what keeps my newsroom running, and keeps my 18 journalists in jobs. So so here to kind of touch on that, but obviously there's a lot of questions about how we're covering this pandemic, as well as civil unrest over racial inequality in this country, and just any number of other stories that just seem like everything is an emergency right now. So so it's quite the time to be a journalist.
Right, agreed. And I have to applaud you and all of your cohorts in the Nevada News Alliance for having such a coordinated and concerted effort to almost to advocate for the survival of good journalism, which a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of, everything that is involved in being a journalist. And so I think having this campaign of information out there is vital to not only your survival, but the survival of our democracy. So thank you for that. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in. We've got some prepared questions as always, and if you're on the call and have a question for Brian that you would like to ask at any point, just use the chat function and we will reserve the last couple of minutes of the call to get to whatever live questions we have. So please don't be shy. Feel free to ask whatever question is on your mind. So let's just jump in with COVID, just to start off with something light. What are some primary ways, whether practical or even philosophical, that COVID-19 has changed the way that local journalists are doing their jobs?
Well, yeah, it's turned our entire operation on its head, as I'm sure it's turned everyone's business on their head. We've been working remotely since March 12th. We literally started in our new office in downtown Reno on March 2nd, and a week and a half later, we had to evacuate, and we've been all working remotely ever since. And so for journalists across the spectrum, whether you're in print media or broadcast or radio, it's to do the act of journalism requires people to go out into the field and to do interviews. So that's made it more difficult just to get photos of people. We've done a lot of portraits where the photographer will stand on the sidewalk and someone will walk out to their porch and we'll get a nice photo of them, so we don't have to go inside the house. We can stay socially distanced. We've had to distribute PPE to our folks, and even had one scare with one of our reporters who had to get tested for COVID, which came back negative. And then philosophically, it's this has been the craziest news cycle I've ever been a part of in my lifetime, where it seems like every single day there's a headline that demands attention, and our audience numbers have never been higher in terms of just every single day people are just thirsty for new information about what's going to come next for phase 2 or phase 3, or the governor will be speaking tonight at 5, and we're all going to be interested to see what he announces in terms of new policy. So it's a very tiring experience. The RGJ, as well as this is Reno and the Nevada Independent, we've all faced budget cuts because of this crisis. Advertising and donations and events, all 3 of those are major lifebloods for local media, and we've all had to cut our budgets. And I just got off furlough last week for the 3rd time this summer, or this spring, to as part of our cost cutting measure, and my furloughs will continue through this next quarter. So so it's just it's the epitome of learning how to adapt. And so because we all believe that the service that these organizations provide are crucial to democracy and people making literally life-saving decisions in terms of whether or not they go out and how to stay safe. And journalism's at the core of that. So
right, absolutely. And I would say that for anyone on this call in any industry, adaptation has been the name of the game. And so that's been a theme that's woven through all of these calls that we've done in every industry. Everyone has been faced with the need to be creative, the need to respond to the needs of the moment. So that's how we're going to continue to move forward as well. What concerns do you have, if any, over COVID-19 coverage in the local media?
It's a hard story to tell because there is so much that we don't know. It's hard to tell the stories of people who have been directly affected by it. Obviously there are privacy protections for people who are who have the disease. So it's been a back and forth in terms of learning, who's died from the disease, how widespread is it, just kind of getting good data and understanding it. And then obviously data is can be fluid, and as we've seen with the statewide data, there's been a lot of revisions in terms of, these were duplicates, this county reported it incorrectly this time, or any number of variables that you have to keep an eye out for. So what that means ultimately is that the information for the public is not always going to be perfect, and it's also because this is a fast moving dynamic problem that that none of us have actually dealt with before. So we're learning as we're going, and as are the folks who are working in government trying to solve this crisis and directly respond to it. Um, you know, yeah, it's a challenge all around just to learn on our feet. So.
Right. It's interesting. We had a call with Dr. Kristen Averett last week, and it's a similar dynamic right now. I think between the observations we're having in the scientific community and perhaps the observations that someone on the outside may have about the media as well, is that because everything is so fluid and dynamic and everything is changing, things are going to be different from day to day. And I think that the analogy that I use to wrap my mind around it is almost like a duck on water. Typically, we're used to seeing the media or the scientific community as just gliding over the information, gliding over the time at hand, and you don't see the paddling that's going on underneath to achieve that kind of stasis. And right now, we're seeing the paddling that's going on underneath, and it's, I think, for a lot of folks, perhaps a little unnerving. So I think just even being mindful of the fact that, you know, this is dynamic, everyone's doing the best they can with the information they have. It's important to keep that in mind.
A really interesting dynamic since we started these Nevada News Alliance meetings, since we can all kind of come together and sort of speak frankly about the experience of not just covering a pandemic, but now added on to protests and civil unrest, that there are stories that my news organization won't be able to get to, just feasibly, that we have to prioritize what we think is the best use of our time. And it's good to know that if Reno Public Radio or the Indy or This Is Reno gets to a story and we don't, it's kind of like, well, at least it got covered. That's a good sign that at least another news organization got to that story, and at least that public information is out there, so we can maybe turn our head to maybe this fire. So
Great. Yes. Speaking of turning our heads to another fire, the 2020 election year, yes, it is happening. It's unlike anything we've ever seen, and so I'm personally curious, but also I think, you know, since covering elections is it's often the lion's share of the public service that journalists are providing. What has that been like? What has been your approach to covering the election cycle this year?
Yeah, I mean, the primary kind of snuck up on us pretty quickly, and we just managed to get our election guides out a week. The last one published literally, I think, 5 days before June 9th. And it's tough because we can't, we're not going out to go cover speeches. We had a whole plan set up to do debates and forms, you know, this cycle, especially for the city council races and the school board races. But with, you know, we don't want to host any events for the foreseeable future. So that sort of puts, you know, that kind of structure out of play. You know, perhaps closer to the general election, we'll want to do digital debates, you know, as it gets closer to the early voting here in Nevada. But yeah, certainly it's made it difficult to cover local races. And obviously, you know, maybe it's a blessing that we don't have any major statewide races this year in terms of constitutional officers or senators, but we do have a presidential election that, you know, Nevada, you know, might play a role in nationally, though it's been trending leftwards for the past couple of cycles, and I think most of the national attention will likely be in the Rust Belt states this time around, and maybe Florida too. But that still said, that the president was making trips here to Nevada as early as, I think, right before the Democratic caucus in February, and we haven't seen any of that since then. And I don't know what's going to happen with that. This is strange. You know, politics in this country are often retail and person to person or in major events. And if that's not going to happen, it sort of changes the nature of the way that the campaign is even going to be covered. And maybe that's, you know, maybe there's a silver lining there too, that the focus of politics at the end of the day should be about policy and should be about, you know, what voters want to see in terms of, okay, if this person is elected, they will conduct this sort of policy agenda. And so we'll continue with that plan as we have in past elections, where we basically take the two primary options. Usually it's two, but sometimes it's more, and sort of just do a dichotomy of this. If you vote this person, this is where they stand on these various topics of major interest. And sometimes we'll even put together quizzes for people, like, hey, just pick the things that you like, and if you, based on your answers, this is kind of who you align more with. So so I don't think that'll change, but certainly the visible emotional side of politics, which is often in person and dynamic, and there's big photos of big events, I don't know if that's going to be happening this year. So.
Right. So shifting gears a little bit to public opinion of the news industry for a minute.
Sure.
So I know this will not be news to you, and I know that every journalist has heard these statistics, but of course in 2019 a Gallup poll indicated that 41% of Americans have a great deal or fair amount of trust in newspapers, television, and radio to report the news fully, accurately and fairly. What would you say if you were to ascribe a percentage of trust here in the Reno-Sparks, Northern Nevada community to the amount of trust that exists for the media? What would you say that would be?
I think local journalism is trusted more than national journalism. I mean, it'd be hard to put a number on it, but I certainly think Americans, generally speaking, based on polling, trust the local media more than they do the national media. And that's just because we have longstanding relationships with our communities. The RGJ, this is our 150th year in business. We started off as the Nevada State Journal and the Reno Evening Gazette, but we combined, 40 years ago now, about. So I mean, we've been here for generations, and it's not a day that goes by that I don't get a call from someone who's been a subscriber for 50 years and they missed their paper today and they're not happy about it. And those relationships that only a local paper can, have. So broadly speaking about the media, I mean, I talk about this problem all the time, and journalists talk about it all the time. And if you're on journalism Twitter ever, you'll see the debates. If you watch folks like Jay Rosen or Brian Stelter or any number of folks who cover the industry full time, journalism has a lot of problems, and I don't deny that whatsoever. Like the media as a monolith, which I think is a inaccurate way to think about journalism, because we're not the same as CNN or Fox News, nor are we the same as the paper that we used to be 40 years ago. Local media has become very digitally centric. It's become, I think it's trending to be more inclusive, but there's still a long ways to go in that too. That if there's a bias, even perhaps, and this is a conversation that is an emergency right now for local media, and that is, are we actually being inclusive in the diverse voices that we feature or actually hire? And the obvious answer is no. And so there's a lot of work to be done just to build trust in communities of color, as well. So I think journalism is a never-ending project, and it's constantly evolving. And I think it's getting better. But certainly, I think if we're talking about specific problems, it might be easier to say, is the coverage of the president good or bad? We can go into that if you want, but that's probably a rabbit hole.
If we had more time, perhaps.
Sure.
So along the lines of trust is a two-way street. And so I'm curious to hear what you believe journalists, and we can even say local journalists in particular, need to be doing in order to cultivate trust with the public. And conversely, what kinds of things does the public need to be looking out for in order to extend that trust? And what should the public see in order to feel as though they can trust the news media?
Yeah, obviously it's a two-way street, and no media outlet is perfect, and credibility is everything. And so no media organization is without faults, and there've clearly been problems and mistakes done in the past, and that will color the way that people look at us at any given time. An editor of mine that I've always, it's some of the advice that I just kind of stuck with me as an intern many moons ago, was that good reporting demands respect. And if you do your work and footwork and you're fair, and I don't like the word objective. I think the word objective has become corrupted and politicized, and it's not really accurate to what journalism should even strive for. I think what journalism should strive for is to be truth tellers and to be fair. And what I mean by that is, we should say the way that things are, not give false equivalence to what things, that to make sure that when we're writing about something, we are saying, yes, this is based in fact and evidence, and we can show you the evidence and the facts, and these are the credible voices who are behind it. And that is as much as we can possibly do at the end of the day. And that is on the flip side, as you said. I mean, obviously we've seen a very dramatic shift in the way Americans consume media in the last decade, especially with the rise of platforms like Facebook and Twitter, as well as other websites like Reddit, and just the overall fragmentation of the media, and the financial crisis that papers find themselves in now. And I think this is probably this is a personal opinion of mine, that I would say that the American public has become far more cynical, I think, in the last decade, to an extent that is unhealthy. And I think it's it's not just with the media, but the trust in institutions overall is the more concerning trend that I see. That trust in education, trust in business, trust in the police, even trust in the media, and trust in our federal institutions like Congress and the presidency have all declined. And that to me is a sign of a troubling problem for a democracy, where we're only as strong as our institutions and the guardrails that we put up around them as norms. And so it probably comes down to just a sign of mutual respect. So I guess the thing that I would say is, you don't have to necessarily trust me. You don't have to necessarily trust the Reno Gazette-Journal. You don't necessarily have to trust, any media outlet in particular. But what I do say is, don't be cynical. Be skeptical, but don't be cynical. And consume as much news as you possibly can, and don't let yourself fall into a bubble and only rely on one single source of information. I would say, generally speaking, cable news, regardless of the source, is bad for your brain. I would say stay away from cable news as much as you possibly can. I think it's emotionally driven information. I don't think it's necessarily always fact-based, unless there's major breaking news happening and you're watching a hurricane destroy a city. I would say try to read as much as you possibly can. Subscribe to your local paper, donate to your local nonprofit, listen to the newscast on NPR in the morning, read what the independent, smaller outlets are writing about these topics. Try to just have a large buffet of information that you can pick from, and eventually you get some sense of reality. But truth is never going to be a concrete thing that is one and done, and this story is the epitome of truth. I mean, truth is always going to be a journey, and you're always going to be, it's never going to be perfect either. And so yeah, I guess I just hope that Americans can find a way to trust again. So
right. I agree, and I want to pull on that thread of credibility a little bit,
Sure.
since because I read this piece in Politico a couple of weeks ago, and it was really well done. It was on a specific I guess, piece of misinformation or disinformation that was becoming widely popular on social media and digitally. And it was a journalist essentially breaking down exactly the process they went through in order to either establish credibility to what this piece of media was saying, or to establish falsehood. and to determine whether or not something that was alleged in this piece of media was a falsehood or not. So in this day and age, it does seem as though it's incumbent upon all of us, and I think you touched on that when you said, you know, we need to be avid news consumers and to, you know, pull as many of those threads together as we can in order to establish our own worldview. What are some of the things that you would say to someone in the general public, because that's most of us on this call, what are some of the journalistic tools that you would recommend us use in order to determine whether or not a piece of media or a news story is credible?
Sure, yeah. And I guess I should probably quickly plug part of the Nevada News Alliance. We're doing these Zoom calls. We have one on July 23rd. You can go to our website to find out about it, but we're doing calls on Is the News Biased is our next one on the 23rd at 4 p.m. If you go to nevadanewsalliance.com, you can get all the details there. And our intention is to have some of this public education around media just for that very question about there's so much information now. There's so much coming at you on your Facebook feed, on the daily, on the evening news, in your morning paper, on your Twitter feed, and it's so easy to get caught up in misinformation. And there's just a good example in the last week. I can't remember the exact example, but basically, usually there's a sorry, this dog who wants her whole phone.
We're all used to it by now.
Yeah. Where, you know, someone will share a photo and they'll say, oh, this is what happened, and then it turns out that's totally fake, and then someone with some like 100,000 Twitter followers will retweet it and say it's real, and then all of a sudden it becomes fake news, and boom, you know, goes out. And I hate that term, by the way, fake news, but disinformation and is real, and it's not an overstatement to say that we are in the middle of a propaganda war in some respects that's not just done internationally, but done by people who are trying to make political inroads here in this country. And so we all have to have our guard up, I guess is the point, that you have to have some tools in your toolkit to try to see, okay, well, is this story credible? So I mean, I would say, generally speaking, mainstream news outlets are the most credible sources of political information in this country, still to this day, based on the fact that the people who are writing the news, recording it, you know, going in and out of the White House or Congress or your state legislature or your city council day in and day out, they have sourcing, they have experience, they know the broad history of what that institution has done. And so, you know, if a friend posts something on Facebook that is sort of like a screed about something, claiming it to be true, I mean, we can take COVID as a good example. Hydrochloroquine is a great, you know, recent example that somehow that drug became politicized, and it took several weeks of news cycles, and I think the FDA just last week said no, we no longer recommend it for use in treating COVID. But you know, everything is politicized nowadays, and you know, I always recommend, I mean, there's a lot of information available to us online, but I'd always say make sure that you're going to credible sources that have expert backgrounds, you know, that blogs, and you know, if you don't know the source of the information, if it's not really clear who that byline is, if you can't actually put a name or face to that, like who's writing the article, what's their purpose, who's paying for the article, how does this news outlet actually make its money? You know, those are all relevant questions nowadays. It's not to say that any particular media outlet is perfect, corporate media versus nonprofit media. You know, there's all pros and cons to every single source, but I guess the point is just to know that disinformation is real, and people are out there trying to manipulate you, and it's something that we all have to kind of come to terms with now. And some countries have been dealing with this a lot longer than we have. I think the Finnish have a really good system. You should read up on that if you want, about how they deal with the misinformation in their community and their news ecosystem. And often it comes down to just calling things out as, this is disinformation, that this is clearly propaganda, and let's talk about it. And this is why it's propaganda. Right. So, yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. The more we can arm ourselves with these tools, these editorial tools, the better off we're all going to be. So thank you for sharing that. We actually have a ton of really good questions and only 2 more minutes to go. If you're okay to stick around for about 5 more
Yeah,
minutes
yeah,
or so,
sure, yeah,
we'll just
yeah,
fire
no,
off.
yeah, I'm fine. I'm good
Great.
as long as you need.
Great. Thank you so much. And of course, folks on the call, if you only have half an hour and have to jump off, no harm, no
Sure,
foul, but please stick around for some of these questions because there are some good ones. So
sure.
the first one that I think would be good to address, so from an editor standpoint, so this is, this person's setup of the question. From an editor standpoint, how do you think Governor Sisolak has handled the COVID-19 crisis? And do you have any particular comment about how the unemployment benefit process has gone?
So yeah, so as far as news coverage of how the governor has handled the crisis, certainly mum has been the word up until it's not, and protecting information until the administration is ready to announce it, I think has been part of their strategy. It's not to say that the state has been entirely reticent to speak, but certainly as a journalist, I would prefer there be some more openness in terms of being able to talk about why things are happening, being a little more proactive, perhaps. Probably would have saved him from some criticism as well. Obviously, this has been a extraordinarily stressful experience for everyone. I won't comment on whether or not phase one or phase two or any particular policy is a good idea or not. I'm not a scientist, nor am I one making political decisions. I'm here to cover the news. But what I can say from a communication standpoint is I tend to lean on the side of being more open and being more consistent with your communication tends to do more for the public good. So, and then the second part of that question was
Unemployment benefits, if you had any
unemployment.
how that's been managed.
Well, as someone who has had to now use the system, yeah, it's kind of a mess, and it's extraordinarily frustrating. And most of the folks in my room have just sort of given up on it. And so I can say from personal experience, it's a very frustrating experience. It's not to say that they aren't working to fix it. I mean, certainly the servers got better over time. That instead of having to log on at 4 a.m. to get access to your claimant page, I can now log on now and it seems to work. So apparently they added more computer servers to the system. But still, the system itself is frustrating for a number of reasons that I'm not necessarily an expert on legislatively about why it is the way it is. But, based on our coverage and based on the coverage from my colleagues at other outlets, it's not hard to find someone in the state who is just had it with the system and is just frustrated beyond belief. So yeah, I think we can all agree that that's just the reality right now.
Right. So this next question, this is really interesting. And we haven't really had time to address this particular issue, so I'm glad that we'll get a chance to do so now. So when it comes to issues of racial injustice that are coming to the surface right now, the media finds itself in a really interesting intermediary ground where you rely on positive, productive relationships with law enforcement, and you also rely on being advocates for the public at large. And so what is it like to function in that role in particular? Kind of standing in the gap between law enforcement and having close relationships with law enforcement, and also what's happening out in the public view.
Yeah. Covering law enforcement is of course journalists develop relationships with members of the law enforcement community in the course of their job, because law enforcement is often at the center of major newsworthy events. But it's not to say that we don't also cover law enforcement as an institution, and just like a city council or a planning commission or a legislature, a police department is also rife with problems that need to also be addressed for the public's good. And so a part of that coverage that we've done in the past is, well, how does law enforcement treat inmates at our jail. And if you recall, we had a pretty major investigation about 3 years ago, yeah, about a spike in inmate deaths here in Washoe County, and that was our role as a news organization, is to sort of do clear-eyed analysis and investigative work into our institutions, especially if people are being harmed or at worst dying. And so through the course of our reporting that Anjanette Damon conducted, she found that, there was a lack of training for suicide prevention. There were some via contract for the medical provider at the jail had switched, and that was causing some issues. And there were some practices being done by deputies in terms of restraining inmates that were resulting in death. And the role of a news organization is to point out those problems so that the public can now face it, and then the public can then tell their elected members, including the sheriff, that, hey, this isn't right, let's change it. So when it comes to a moment like this, where we have civil unrest around what was obviously a tragic and maddening, horrifying death of a man that was caught on video, with a knee placed on his neck for more than 8 minutes, a black man and a white officer, and our society has been rightfully outraged by that imagery and by the actions taken that day in Minneapolis. And so now we're in a situation where civil unrest is occurring, and it's not the first time it's happened, and it won't be the last. And as a news organization, we're here to cover all of it, to show that the majority of the protesters here in Reno have been largely peaceful. For example, that, there were more than 1,000 people that came out on May 29th or 30th, the night before it turned chaotic and violent and resulted in the destruction of property, including City Hall in downtown Reno. We were also there to cover that. As well as we had folks down in Vegas, covering the marches down there that tragically ended in the shooting of a Metro officer, and the shooting death of another man whose background I'm still a little hazy on. I'm not really sure. I haven't followed up on what that guy's background was, but still, the point is that we're going to be covering all of it, and we want to cover it fairly. And so, I mean, law enforcement, it seems to me, and the how I've seen just Chief Soto and Sheriff Balaam react to this, they're wanting to have a conversation around this as well. I believe they had a town hall last night. I think they were about to publish a story about it, about what's law enforcement's role here in terms of talking about racial injustice, what needs to change. And I think it's a very important topic that we all need to tackle that. Clearly, if you look at the data, there are disparities in terms of how people of color are treated overall in the country. And especially when things turn violent with law enforcement. And so as news organizations, we're here to be a part of that conversation and facilitate it. So hopefully, healthy, good policy decisions can come out of this, and the public will be better off for it in the end. So.
Great, thank you. Thank you for addressing that. So we'll just take a couple more minutes to answer this final question, and then we'll go ahead and cut everyone loose. Again, thank you all for hanging in there a little bit of extra time to address some of these important questions. So I think that the heart of this question is about the dynamic between nonprofit and for-profit news outlets. And so I think the thrust of the question is having nonprofit news outlets. Is that do you think that that's a fair answer to for-profit journalism? Is there a sense of the two balancing each other out, or is that an unfair comparison? What is the dynamic there, especially in terms of outlets being somewhat competitive?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's a good thing to have multiple funding models for journalism right now, because the industry has become, like I kind of alluded to at the top, that we're in a crisis, and a funding crisis, and so we need to experiment with as many funding models as possible right now. And it's good to see that Nevada finally has a few nonprofit model sort of in works right now. You obviously have legacy outlets like myself, or the Review Journal down in Las Vegas, or any number of television broadcast networks that are all for-profit corporate media. So so the Reno Gazette Journal is owned by Gannett. We're part of the USA Today network. It is part of a major merger with Gatehouse Media, which has made us the largest newspaper publisher in the country. There is both good and bad to being part of a major corporation, just as there's good and bad about being part of a small nonprofit. So there are no this is the only way to go forward. There's always going to be pros and cons to any kind of funding model. And so for a nonprofit outlet, it's based solely on donors and foundations, and the tax write-offs that come through our legal system. But still, primarily donor-based media has a lot of pluses. But as I'm sure, as you all see, they're not immune to a criticism as well, that, oh, well, you're just being bought and paid for by the politicians that you're writing about. I mean, I've seen that too. Same thing with us. You guys are bought and paid for by all your advertisers, and you'll never write anything negative about the casinos or about the car dealerships, right? Which is not true. But and nor do I think that's true about the nonprofits. And I think it all comes down to integrity and credibility, and showing people that, no, yes, we do ask hard questions and do difficult stories about the institutions that do pay for our salaries. And I can tell you directly that I have been a part of stories that have lost major advertisers because we had to write about something that it was we just could not write about it. And same with, I'm sure, with the nonprofits. I'm sure they've gone through similar issues where they've probably lost donors because of what they've had to write. And I think at the end of the day, all we can do is guard our own credibility and integrity, and continue to do journalism that the public will see as important to our future as a community. And it's a message that I try to spread as much as possible. That, I mean, for me as a local paper, what I try to say is subscribers matter more to me than anything right now. And people subscribing, paying directly for their news is just the civically responsible thing to do, because it'll help us at least find a path forward, since our traditional model of advertising has declined. And I truly believe that the future of local journalism is community supported, nonprofit, and even on my end, looking for grant opportunities and looking for nonprofit opportunities, even for my organization, to help fund projects. I think that's the future. So.
Yeah, agreed. And that's a great space to leave it. So Brian, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to everyone who hung in there for an extra couple of minutes on this call. We've got more calls coming, and we've got some good ones on the way. So I'm thrilled to be able to offer that to everyone here. So keep your eyes on those daily briefings. And then also, Brian, just very quickly, did you want to tell everyone how to connect to the Zoom call that you guys have coming up Thursday?
Yeah, it's on July 23rd, so in about a month at 4 p.m. If you go to NevadaNewsAlliance.com, you can also follow us, News Alliance NV, as in Nevada, on Twitter and Facebook. You can find details there. So we intend to do a lot of regular public events like that, where we can bring on journalists from our community, or even people who are journalism adjacent, to talk about the media, how things are being covered, the upcoming election. So we really hope to host a lot of forums for the public to kind of just learn about how we do our jobs, and kind of the role we play here in our community. So I really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you. Absolutely. And we will certainly have you on again. Great. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Cheers. Bye. Bye.